Greetings and welcome to the workshop session in InfoOB Global Virtual Summit 2022. Track 1, Humanities and Social Sciences. Theme 1, Models of Learning, Moving from Principles to Practices. And topic, Exploring Motivation to Elevate Assessment Efforts. Hello, I am Syed Aslam, Associate Professor in Mechanical Engineering Department from Lord's Institute of Engineering and Technology, Hyderabad, Telangana State, India, and your moderator today. Speaker will have about 2 hours for his presentation, and we will take 3 breaks after 30 minutes for question and answer. I will notify the speaker at 30 minutes and 5 minutes remaining time. Okay, then now I am going to narrate our speaker's bio. Today's workshop speaker is Dr. Joseph D. Levy. Dr. Joseph D. Levy serves as an Executive Director of Assessment and Accreditation at National Louis University in Chicago, IL. Joe earned a BA in English from Baldwin Wallace College, an MS in Student Affairs in Higher Education from Colorado State University, and his doctorate in Education in Higher Education Leadership from National Louis University. Joe is a member of the Student Affairs Assessment Leaders Board of Directors, co-creator and instructor for the Applying and Leading Assessment in Students Affairs Open Course, and endorsed speaker for the National Institute of Learning Outcomes Assessment. An author, presenter, trainer, and consultant, Joe enjoys leveraging his academic and students' affairs experience from multiple institutional types to talk assessment, quality assurance, and institutional betterment. Over to Dr. Joe. Thank you.
All right.
Now, it's
Great. Well, thank you, and hello, everybody. Unfortunately, my video is not working, but you should be able to hear my voice and see my screen and presentation. And honestly, that's the most important part. So I'm excited to be here and talk to you all about exploring motivation to elevate assessment actions. So if it's possible, I'd love to hear from who is actually attending or who's in the audience. And so if you could put in the chat or share your role, whether you're an administrator, an assessment professional, faculty member, graduate student, a staff member, or other, that just be helpful for me to know to get an idea of who might be here and what type of audiences I'm presenting to. And so as you all look to do that, I also want to share a few things. I have a handout that I've presented that folks can reference and use throughout the session. It doesn't look like the chat's available for everybody, so I'll just leave this link up here so that you all can see it and copy it down and access it. I'm glad to use the short link so that it's a little easier to copy and type in. But ultimately, this handout will have a link to some polls that I'm going to try and do for the session for engagement purposes, as well as a link to some a handout resource for notes and reflections, as well as a link to a number of resources that support the presentation. So I'm giving just a little more time for folks to potentially copy down that link. And then here is what the resource actually looks like. So when you log in, when you go into that link, you should see the title. It has my contact information at the top. So if you want to get a hold of me after this presentation, that's how you can do so. It has a link to a PDF copy of this presentation. It then has links to some polls we're going to be using, as I mentioned, and a link to the Jamboard, which is here, where you can go in and put in your notes in relation to content that we're covering throughout the session. And I'll refer back to this as we go along, but wanted to just be sure and share that. And since we don't have the chat enabled, it'll be something that I'll try and allot a little more time for as we go. I'm also just going to edit my my slides to include the other link as well. Okay. All right. So here we go. All right. Got that all accounted for. Okay. So what we're gonna cover today is largely first summarizing the assessment landscape. Then we're going to talk about self-determination theory and its relationship to assessment as well as to faculty. And then I'm going to summarize some case study findings and look to discuss and give examples of how you can leverage self-determination theory for assessment motivation. And then I'll have time available for some concluding remarks, sharing of some resources, and fielding questions that people might have. And hopefully, you know, because realizing the chat isn't enabled, so hopefully there's a way that the people can see or share comments or questions. But hopefully this is clear in terms of an overall structure for what we're going to be looking to do. And we will move right along here. All right. So to start things off, I want to talk about the assessment landscape, which first and foremost, there's been a continued and increasing call from external quality assurance entities to provide evidence of student learning and student success. Internally, good educational practice calls for data-informed decision-making and to know our work is having its intended impact. Assessment enables both those things. Now, assessment isn't the only mechanism for that. It's the only one solely intended to measure student learning, which is a common aspect of what institutions of higher education set out to do. Now, externally, accrediting bodies, political entities, and the public want more evidence of effectiveness and impact of student learning and student success as a sign of a return of investment. And assessment can, help demonstrate that. So, like superheroes, we have the knowledge and great power comes with responsibility. So as educators, we have the ability to both help advance learning as well as collect the data and evidence and show how learning is happening. But also in collecting that evidence, we can see how and where students can use support and where learning may not be going appropriately. So if we have data-informed improvement in, say, our DNA and our strategic plan, and if leadership are encouraging assessment advancement, there's a considerable amount of external reporting that's required, but then our regular assessment reports lack effective use of results or sharing of results, then there's a problem, because we should be using assessment to inform actions that we're taking, to be data informed, and to share these results so that, not just we know how students are learning, but students themselves know and external parties know as well. So everyone who engages directly with students and hopes to change their knowledge or behavior has a responsibility for assessment of student learning. So faculty and staff are both on the hook for this work, and it's important that they are all active partners in this, and that they're not just leaving to assessment professionals to do the work here. Assessment practices are the #1 area of concern cited among accreditors, as well as struggles that are reported by provosts the past several years in a landscape survey done by the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment. Specifically, provosts have cited the use of assessment results in decision-making or taking action and making changes for improvement as one of the top areas that they're struggling with. And while it may be easy to assume that employees don't want to do this work or that they're avoiding assessment, there can be actually a number of barriers that is obstructing their engagement. The first barrier can be a lack of training and experience, specifically with assessment. And this shouldn't necessarily be a surprise, considering that the faculty enterprise is still one that prioritizes subject matter expertise. And so if you are a faculty member in chemistry, then they prioritize the fact that you are a chemist, that you know the world of chemistry, but not necessarily that you have formal training and understanding of teaching and learning practices, teaching and learning principles, and how best to educate students. So if by nature of their core job as an instructor, or that part of their job as a faculty member, if they don't necessarily have training in teaching and learning, then it's not safe for us to assume they have any training or experience in assessment of student learning. There can also be a very real lack of agency and autonomy. So, lack of, or where it does exist, it can get overwhelming, or where there isn't enough support. So a lack of autonomy, real or perceived, can present itself as faculty leaders feeling like they're unable to determine their approach to assessment beyond what's prescribed by certain projects, the institution, accreditors, or they're being told to lead an effort and then not having the resources or authority to do so. They might be unable to change existing measures in their program due to academic or industry practices, or unable to make changes to their curriculum because of other cued curriculum efforts that they can't control, and that could prove frustrating or demotivating for them. Assessment can also feel like an individualized effort, and even faculty members in doing their work can feel that they're on their own, and that their department or their discipline is so separate or so unique from other ones that they feel like they're by themselves, and these individualized efforts can prevent support from coming from a sense of community, or even there being a sense of real community of people collaborating and working with one another. There can also be a very real lack of internal accountability mechanisms, and this can be positive or negative. So negative in the sense that accountability mechanisms to hold folks accountable to doing assessment work and turning in assessment reports and engaging in data-informed practice. But it can also be, on the positive side, rewarding faculty for engaging in this work, celebrating the programs that are consistently demonstrating data-informed improvements. And while there are people who abstain from assessment work completely, the number of faculty and staff that are merely complying or inauthentically participating is equally concerning. So it's not just that people participate, but we really need to be looking at the ways in which they're engaging in this work. Because if they're just turning in reports that meet the expectations, but it's not meaningful to them, then that's also a problem, because they're likely then, again, not acting on it or not demonstrating fidelity in the process to best support student success. So I'd be curious to know, which barrier resonates most with folks. And I'm gonna add a quick slide here, since the chat isn't available, so that we can get your responses. So if you go to one, if you're on the handout, you can go to here we go. If you're on the handout, you can go to this link for the Mentimeter polls. But I'll put this link in on the PowerPoint so that you have that. And you'll have two options. Okay. All right. So here's the link. And so folks can go here. You can either use that direct link at the top, menti.com/46I1I 4J2OF. Let me shrink this a little for you so it all fits on one line. Or you can go to menti.com and use the code 5888073. And if you do that, you should be seeing this. You should see this question pop up about which barriers are the most concerning or prevalent at your institution. So I'll put this up and just give folks a moment to go to Menti if they can and indicate which of those barriers I mentioned might be the most prevalent or resonate with you. And I know potentially it might be hard to to pick just one. But yeah, if you could indicate the whether it's the lack of training or experience, the lack of agency and autonomy, the individualized efforts, or potentially the lack of accountability, or finally, this idea of insufficient actions. So, like I said, I'll just give people a moment to go there, put their potential information in. And we'll see what results we get. I will say, having conducted this presentation elsewhere, that there are a number of options that come up, and spoiler alert, these are all barriers that many folks experience at varying levels. It can even look different sometimes per department, which can be all the more interesting. Okay, so thank you all for reflecting there. So I want to move on and begin to talk about. Oh, yes. Go ahead, Syed. So thank you all for reflecting there. So I want to move on and talk about. Oh, yes. Syed, did you have a comment or question?
Up till now, nobody has asked any questions. I have just asked them to put any questions now. You can continue, sir. Okay. Also, I just was multitasking a little bit and navigated to the web version of the presentation and saw that there's chat there, and so I hopped into that chat. And so if folks have questions, hopefully I'll be able to see them over there, since there's not a chat feature in Zoom to see. Okay. Right. So self-determination theory helps understand motivation by considering internal mechanisms that people use for regulation of behavior. And the theory posits that 3 needs form the basis of motivation. And these needs, competence, relatedness, autonomy, these needs they don't have to be met in a specific order, but in meeting each of them, they can contribute or take away from the well-being or functioning of an individual's self-motivation and behavior regulation. And so I'll walk through each of these. First, competence is characterized as a need for someone to believe in their knowledge or abilities. Generally, people want to feel capable and able to perform tasks that are required of them, because optimal performance cannot be achieved without competence. Individuals seek to fulfill this need, especially for activities of interest or importance to them.
which makes a lot of sense. Competence is one of the needs here that I feel like needs the least explanation because it's the most familiar and potentially obvious in terms of associated with motivation and what might be a barrier, right? You need to feel competent in order to engage in activities. Now, relatedness, which in some of the literature is also referred to as belongingness or connectedness, this is an individual's need to feel part of, accepted, and supported by either a group or an environment. And so, obviously, people have a natural desire to be connected to activities or to be within community. And so this just speaks to that aspect of, again, thinking about regulating behavior. The more we are feeling connected or part of a space, then the more likely we will feel motivated to stay engaged in that space or in that activity. Then autonomy is described in self-determination theory as having the power to exercise one's will or to be in control. And this is another area where it seems pretty self-explanatory that people want to have control over their circumstances. And this can especially be a space for faculty where we may need to focus a bit more on realizing the extent with which faculty feel like they have autonomy and having an accurate gauge of that, not just what we sense or assume, but really talking to faculty about what that looks like and thinking realistically about the amount of autonomy they can have and setting those expectations with them. So I just wanted to share again the link to the handout. So I've updated this so that the top link is the link to the handout overall. The bottom link there is the link specifically to the Jamboard. And I just wanted to make sure and share this. And I'll show it on my screen again because here on the Jamboard, you can be making comments, and I posted some potential reflection questions. But as we cover and discuss self-determination needs, you can be making notes, and as you make a note, you can pick a color, and then you can kind of cancel out of that, and then whatever your note is, you can move it around. So let's say you have a comment about a need not being met, you can move it there, and then even after you make it, you can then go in and edit it to say, this is something we struggle with across our programs. And there it is, and you can, as other potential notes come on here, you can move your content around. And you can also duplicate it. So if you want to then quick make another comment, you can do that. And you can delete your comments as well. And we have some other pages, but I'll get to those shortly as we continue on with the presentation. But feel free to use that Jamboard as your note-taking space because that's what it's intended for. Okay. So I briefly explained self-determination theory on its own, but now I want to walk through its relationship to faculty and then its relationship to assessment. So on the faculty front, competence and relatedness matter for faculty as subject matter experts, needing faculty and staff as subject matter experts, needing to feel capable and related to their functional area. So activity management, whether that's events, workshops, courses, research, they call for autonomy and competence, where staff are self-motivated to know and control their environment in order to best serve and manage or engage participating students. Motivation overall is important in learning environments, given it's been found to be a significant predictor of enjoying the teaching experience and likelihood to use best educational practices. So those who enjoy or value their roles tend to be the most effective in them. We're seeing things, at least right now in the U.S., the Great Resignation and some people quietly quitting, where they are resigning themselves to, if they're not happy in their job or if they don't like their role, they're kind of resigning to do the minimum in their capacity, and so likely, evidently their needs are not being met, right? Whereas, the more their needs are met, the more likely they'll be motivated and effective to engage in their work and to best serve others. Now, with assessment, there are multiple, in my head, very clear, easy, overt connections. Honestly, I stumbled onto this work when I was doing my dissertation, and my immediate thoughts went straight to assessment because I saw all these connections almost immediately and latched onto this theory. So first, competence, right? Competence is huge. When we think about assessment work, again, I already talked about one of the big barriers is a lack of knowledge of assessment, or if we're talking specifically about taking action with assessment results, knowledge to act on data is a huge barrier with faculty and staff doing assessment work. So competence is a clear, big connection and prevalent piece and need in assessment work. And with relatedness or belongingness, certainly this aspect of feeling part of the program or process, or that their voice and their perspective matters. This isn't something that is just externally being imposed upon them or that they're told to do this, but instead they feel supported in general in their roles, but also specifically with assessment. And this, again, is another clear connection with assessment, because often assessment is not something that is naturally part of or ingrained in majority of higher education people's day-to-day work. They focus on their job. Faculty focus on being faculty, doing research, teaching courses. Staff members focus on doing their work, engaging with students, serving students, leading programs. Assessment is not necessarily at the forefront of their minds or of their roles. And so often when they're being asked to engage in it, it does feel like something that is being imposed upon them, or that's not part of their world, but is now, an add-on. And so this need of relatedness certainly is a very real one with assessment. And finally, autonomy. Again, feeling in control of a process or content, self-motivated to master their environment, generate evidence. Certainly in assessment, again, like I was just saying with relatedness, assessment can be imposed upon people, or there can be a universal or unified template or approach that an institution is trying to have everybody follow, whereas an individual, their department, their office, their discipline, they feel like that doesn't fit that mold, and they would like to do something more customized or personalized to their area, and they feel like they don't have the power to do that. Likewise, they may want to generate specific evidence or study or evaluate or assess certain components, but they're being told not to do that, or they're being told that that's not the focus for a given year. And so this idea of even the self-motivation to engage in this space, there can be a lot that goes into that. So I wanted to pause again and just check in with folks to see what might be the need in assessment that you crave the most in relation to your assessment work. So would it be, oh, hang on, let me get the slide up here. So here again, if you go to menti.com, use the code 5888073, or let me tighten up this slide again. So you all have that. It's a little easier. Oop. Here you go. And I'll put it in the web chat as well, the link. But if we think about which of these needs, competence, autonomy, relatedness, which of those best align, or you individually crave, or you're finding that your staff or your faculty are sharing as concerns, that's noteworthy, right? So again, if you go to the Menti poll, this is what it'll look like. Ask which need do you crave the most: competence, relatedness, autonomy. Or in this question, I do give you all the option of saying all of them. if you're torn, and if you feel like you're seeing these needs pop up in a couple different ways. Sorry, here we go. Here's what the poll will look like when you're in there. All right, so I'll give a minute for folks to access those links and engage. And I will say, even, well, as we'll see with my results of my case study, again, all of these aspects are very real and very alive with different aspects, even within different departments and different individuals. Syed, can you mute your line? We were hearing you talk back there. Can you mute your line? Syed, can you mute your line?
Yeah.
Can you mute your line, because we can hear you and background noise talking there.
Right. Because okay, continues.
Okay. All right. Okay. So I think, one of the most important components here when I think about self-determination theory and its connection with faculty and to assessment is, faculty and staff are expected and responsible for assessment work, right? We know that, but we also know they face a number of barriers. And we know that higher education assessment landscape, the issue is no longer getting just participation, but instead the extent of that and quality of that participation, as well as the use of the data for actions and support the people that are involved. So there's this opportunity to apply self-determination theory to people engaged in assessment and to assessment itself, because the more we know about faculty and staff behavior and motivations, the more we can improve both their individual experiences, but also then their assessment experiences. Because if we're feeding and better serving their ultimate needs, that can help their day job overall, as well as specifically their experience with assessment. So again, this is a time that you could go to the handout and click on the link for the Jamboard, or go directly to the Jamboard, and on this second page, or I'm sorry, on this first page, you could still just continue to add potential reflections on self-determination needs, both the connections, right, to faculty, to assessment, the idea of which needs aren't being met, or how could needs better be met. Just want to make sure to give folks an opportunity to reflect on that, as well as to think about how that's a very real option for action, and a specific tact to and lens from which to view barriers to assessment work is through these behavioral needs that people have. So before I dig into the case study findings, I just wanted to pause and see. I'm not seeing any questions or concerns in the chat. So I don't know if any have come up on your end, Syed. I just want to make sure folks are with us, hanging on. And if there's anything I can do to clarify anything at this point. Okay. Well, seeing and hearing none, we're going to look to move forward. So, again, I delved into this work as part of my dissertation, and then some work I did with some colleges, but ultimately I embarked upon survey methodology that was sent to faculty program leaders, and I wanted to better understand their motivation in relation to assessment. So for me, the research question was, how does self-determination theory help explain faculty program leaders' use of assessment evidence? I had these 4 hypotheses, but the one thing that I'll just say outright, because individually I was looking at the individual needs and their association with use of assessment evidence, and then I looked collectively at all 3 needs together, and so that's the self-determination theory. And what I would say is that the only viable hypothesis after correlation and regressions was this hypothesis 4, that self-determination theory is associated with assessment evidence. Some delimitations that I want to be upfront about is that the population that was surveyed was narrowed, first of all, just to faculty, and second of all, to faculty program leaders as opposed to all faculty, because I wanted to make sure to engage the people that I knew were doing or charged with doing assessment work. Certainly individual faculty members, adjunct faculty members could be doing this work on their own, but at our institution, faculty program leaders are the ones who have the ultimate responsibility to engage and author the reports and lead the way. And while I did collect some data from other institutions in leading up to my study and after, ultimately the results I'm sharing today are just from our institution. And I'd also say that it's mostly quantitative data. And so the limitations that come with this are that it was because it's just from one institution, it's a small sample size. These are indirect self-reported responses. So, the faculty's perspectives of how they're using the data and how their needs are or are not being met. That's just their own opinions and what they're reporting. It wasn't necessarily validated with other data sets. And also, it's important to recognize my bias and perspective and positionality as the researcher. I live and love this work, so I know a lot about it, and also know these faculty members. So this idea, the self-reporting, thankfully that their results weren't connected to identity, but I know which faculty members, like if I were to share, which ones and what their needs might be, I would probably have some different answers than what maybe they shared. But there were some efforts I took to minimize that, or at least place my positionality and perspective where it was best best utilized in the process, and tried to not let it affect the at least initial analysis. So in relation to assessment, when we looked at needs being met, faculty program leaders thought that, they shared that they experienced relatedness the most frequently, which is followed closely by competence and then autonomy. So I thought this was promising. I liked the fact that relatedness was, the aspect that the need that was being met the most, that they didn't feel like this was something that was completely unrelated to them, or that they didn't feel supported in it. And I also wasn't surprised, like the lowest one was autonomy, because faculty are always wanting a bit more autonomy in their work. Now, based on the results of the correlation tests using Kendall's Tau as the method, and the predictor variables of autonomy, competence, and relatedness have positive dependence or relationship with the use outcome, the idea of using assessment results for action or change. But those relationships were not statistically significant. And so with no statistically significant relationship between the individual self-determination theory needs as predictor variables with that use outcome, further analysis wouldn't be conducted with them. But the final predictor variable of all the needs together, right, this self-determination theory variable, had, again, a positive and statistically significant dependence or relationship on the use variable. So self-determination theory had a statistically significant positive relationship with the use variable. And all that put together, really allowed me to reject that null hypothesis and say that, as self-determination theory needs are collectively met, competence, relatedness, autonomy, as those needs are collectively met, faculty program leaders' use of assessment evidence increases, which is huge. I mean, at face value, that's not too earth-shattering of a revelation, but it's a great confirmation of the fact that this is something people are experiencing, right? And that we can demonstrate this with, while the theory makes sense and while the hypothesis makes sense, that, we're able to prove it with data. I also wanted to show and be clear then about the types of uses or the ways in which faculty were most reporting assessment use. The top three were using assessment results for program review, program accreditation, or external accountability purposes. This shouldn't surprise anybody because, again, the idea of assessment, often where it's being asked of people or where they're doing it, is because of external entities, external quality assurance entities saying, we need you to report on this. We need these results. We need to see what you're doing with respect to student learning. And so if that is a need, an externally imposed request, then you better believe that that's what they're doing. Now, the bottom three needs, or the bottom three uses, were using results to improve co-curricular experiences, using results for professional development, or using results for allocation and budgeting. And, I thought that was interesting, especially the last one. I thought that was interesting, especially for our institution, because that's something that we talk about, and that we even have as part of our strategic planning process, is that we're using multiple forms of data, not just assessment, but multiple forms of data about individual programs and services, to then think about and strategize, how we're going to allocate resources and budget accordingly for the coming year, especially if change is needed and we need to invest in making changes. But what I would say about these results, again, while they are a case study of one institution, they very much match the literature in the field, at least of higher education institutions in the US, that these are also the top and bottom uses for majority of higher education institutions who have also reported on this information, that by and large, they are using assessment results for program review and external accreditation purposes, and they're not using them for co-curricular, professional development, or resource allocation purposes. Now, one of the things I also did was so going back, when we talked about this idea of the use variable in which these need variables we were looking for correlations, that use variable was all of those uses together. So any use of assessment results, we were putting in this pool, kind of like how we combined the individual needs as variables into the combined self-determination theory variable. But I did do an analysis of the self-determination theory need variables in relation to these unique uses. And so there were 24 possible relationship combinations there, but only 3 relationships were significantly correlated. A positive statistical significant relationship exists between competence and external accountability, as well as self-determination theory, the combined variable with external accountability. There was also a significant relationship that exists between autonomy and co-curricular improvement. So that was interesting. that this low use element had a significant relationship with one of the needs. But and there's a lot more I could potentially say about any of these uses, but I just wanted to share that high level information. And so that being said, I did want to pause here to have folks think about what stands out to you in relation to the data I've shared so far, and thinking specifically about what this means with respect to which needs are met with your faculty and your staff in relation to assessment, especially around autonomy, competence, relatedness, and also use of results. And so thinking about if imagining if you were to do this study at your institution, what would the top, when we think about the uses, which of these uses do you think would be the highest, and the ways with which your faculty are sharing that information, or staff too, how they're using their assessment results. And so, again, the first link is the link to the overall handout. The second link is the link specifically to the Jamboard. And so if you were in the overall handout, you can also then just click on the Jamboard. And then if you're in the Jamboard, you would go to the next frame, and then here's some additional reflection for those top 3 uses, bottom 3 uses, as well as reflections for the faculty quotes. So while I give folks a moment to, access those things and reflect, I did want to answer one question that came through of, what are the best practical assessment methods to judge faculty? And I'd say that is a interesting question that I would unpack a little bit and make sure to draw some clear lines to help inform my answer. One, I want to be clear that assessment of student learning efforts should not be used to evaluate faculty. That is not their purpose. The purpose of assessment of student learning work is to assess and evaluate student learning. Now, naturally, if instructor A has students that are demonstrating learning at a higher rate than instructor B, you might look into why that is, but we should not be quick to assume that is because instructor A is a better faculty member than instructor B. There could be all sorts of reasons why the student learning was higher or better in one course versus another. It could be that those students were just smarter, or that the classroom community was more conducive to student learning. Regardless of the role that the faculty member may be playing there. Now, that being said, it shouldn't be completely ruled out that, because obviously faculty have a role in influencing student learning, but evaluating faculty has its own purpose and can have its own measures for doing that. So that delineation made, if the activity is to evaluate or judge faculty, then there's a couple of ways to do that. One, and an important one, despite what literature might say about the merit of course evaluations, which could be worth considering, but in some way we should engage students for feedback. So now, is the best way through a course evaluation? Maybe, maybe not. But it stands to reason that if we're talking about judging faculty and a component of their job is being an instructor, we should talk to the people who they instruct, and we should get feedback from them about the effectiveness of the faculty member. And we should try and keep it specific and ask very pointed questions and get away to try and minimize any polarizing responses, because naturally if a student, got all A's in a class, and they're asked very general questions about the instructor, because they maybe, aced the class, they might just give positive reviews for the faculty member. And vice versa. If the student really struggled in a course, did not get a good grade, they might generally give a bad evaluation for their faculty member. So we need to ask very specific questions to help overcome those polarizing realities, because I'll tell you, and perhaps you all individually have experienced this, that you can get a good grade in a course and still have a bad experience with a faculty member. Or you can do well in a course and the faculty member did not play a large role in that. And the opposite can be true too. You can do terrible in a course and get a low grade that you're not happy with, but your faculty member could have worked really hard and been really effective in connecting with you and trying to support you, but ultimately, the content just didn't click. So that's why, we need to ask very specific questions about the activity of the faculty members and the things with which we're evaluating them on, and do so in a way and with language that students understand, so that we're truly getting direct feedback from students about the instructor in ways that hopefully are not, again, polarizing or just generic, and too colored by the student's overall positive or negative experience in the course. So students are one, right? That's one avenue of feedback. Another is the faculty member themselves, a self-evaluation, asking them to intentionally reflect on their performance, what they did well, what they could be doing better. And also too, giving them very specific prompts or dimensions or criteria with which they're evaluating themselves. And you can also then do the same and get feedback from their peers. So other faculty member who've worked with them or collaborated with them, or work in courses around them. So they're receiving students after that faculty member has had them in class, so that they know kind of how the students are, what they're coming from. But I think those are some common ways, and to the extent that a program director or the supervisor or superior of that faculty member is doing observations and dropping into the classroom and able to evaluate that faculty member on their classroom experience, then naturally you should get their feedback as well. But that's predicated upon the fact that they are getting firsthand experience of seeing that faculty member in action, and not just evaluating them based on their mannerisms and performance in meetings or in faculty only settings, but truly being able to see and engage with them in the classroom. So I'll stop there because I feel like I've been talking about that question and that information good long enough. Happy to revisit that topic if folks want to talk more about that, or others, but hopefully that gave some time for either A, folks to put in some reflections on the Jamboard or with their own notes, or B, to also take a little break because we're a little over the halfway mark here in terms of time for this session. So hopefully folks are ready to go and dive back in. So I wanted to dig back into the study, and I wanted to share some of the little qualitative data that we did receive, and some quotes from from our faculty. So this faculty member shared that we've become so data oriented that I think we are losing some of the personal touch we have long noted for. We've used design. We used to design our own assessment based on our programs, but now so much is mandated that it really doesn't relate to what we are doing. The disposition survey, for example, and that's a specific example for them. Everyone rates themselves as proficient, and most of them are. So what's the point? And so in this quote, I mean, hopefully you can see and hear the aspects of autonomy, relatedness, really coming through here, and that competence is strong, right? Because this person's saying that they want to design their own assessment, and that they're craving more individualized and specific data. So really kind of all those needs coming through there. Here's another one that focuses heavily on the autonomy component. As faculty, we used to really enjoy the process of designing program assessment studies, but now the college process comes across as giving orders. And the process has been used to put people and programs down when it should really be about building programs up. And just as a side note, that goes back to my point about assessment shouldn't be used to evaluate faculty members and their performance. It should be talking about student learning within that program. But anyway, and then they give a little shout out of the assessment office as knowledgeable, supportive, positive. But these good efforts have been overshadowed by a generally negative college attitude. And I thought that was really interesting too, to point out that just because faculty can be getting support, strong support, and helpful support from certain areas of an institution, that can be overshadowed, or it cannot be enough if they're not getting it from other areas of the institution, right? If their day-to-day is within their college and that's their specific environment they're regularly in, and they don't feel supported there, they don't feel like their needs are being met, then then the needs being met, or the supportive efforts coming from elsewhere, may not be enough to counteract that, which is why it can't just be a single office or a handful of individuals trying to meet those needs of faculty. It really needs to be a collective effort of people focusing on meeting one another's needs. This other quote is, it's been some time since our program outcomes has led to specific follow-up actions. But this was not always the case. Assessment has the potential to be very effective and very rewarding when it bears a clear connection to strategy, planning, and curriculum development. So here they're talking about this, a relatedness component, right, of how assessment can be situated with other activities, and they feel like it's just not, that it's something that it may be somewhat isolated, and they're admitting that their program is not using their assessment results, or at least not using them as much as they could be. And this was a very honest response too, of a faculty member sharing that they acknowledge and they assume results are being used, or they hope results are being used, specifically for resource allocation and budgeting, but honestly, they're not aware of it. They don't know that they're being used. They don't know for sure that they're being used in that way. And that's that also came through with some quotes about co-curricular improvement. Faculty sharing that generally they lack the knowledge of co-curricular efforts and ways to best integrate it, so therefore the use is low. So one of the things that came through is this idea that, again, the professional development component for faculty and staff was a bottom 3 use, using assessment results for professional development. But that's really disappointing and compounding to these barriers or concerns or limitations to the practice, because we know that competence was not met as a need as much as it could have been. We know faculty had previously indicated they need support in taking action, and we know that faculty lack formal assessment training. But maybe faculty is similar to this, faculty members not aware of the results being used for research satisfaction. Maybe they're not aware of or even think it's possible to use assessment results to inform and shape professional development, because they might think assessment results are just used for external reporting. Or going the autonomy route, they may not feel empowered to request or create such professional development. So again, I invite you to kind of sit with your own thoughts, reflections. We have the Jamboard where you can share the feedback about the results, the top 3 uses, the bottom 3 uses, but also then the reactions for faculty quotes here on this on the second page, so you can add thoughts there. But I just want to pause and let folks sit with this information, as well as think about if you have questions that are arising for you around this information. And hopefully the quotes are helping bring some of these components to life a bit more, and perhaps sounding similar to what you might be accustomed to hearing, or what you might expect to hear. Okay. I'm gonna shift then to my second to last section here. With this section really talks about how we can use self-determination theory for improvements, and then I have some closing thoughts and plenty of time then for some Q&A or some engagement with folks. But first, let's think about how can we use these results? How can this information, if you were to do this study on your campus, how could we use information for change? So first, I want to remind people that from an assessment perspective, it's important to be effective and not just increase use, right? So the goal is not just to make sure or strive to get 100% of programs and departments turning in assessment reports, right? Like that is no longer the bar to be met. What we should be looking for are the reports that are turned in, and hopefully we're getting most of them, if not all of them, but are the results that are being turned in appropriate and of quality? And are people going to use those results for change? Which is really important, because if a report is being turned in and if there's insights gained about things to change or things to improve, and that action is not being taken, I mean, that's something that I've characterized in some other publications as data negligence. It would be better to have not done the assessment at all, in my opinion, than to have done it and not taken action. Because at least if you didn't do it, you could plead ignorance. And you could say, I didn't know. I didn't know students were struggling in that way. I didn't know this program could have been enhanced because of those components. But when you report on it and then don't take action for whatever reason, that's a bad look. And that's not good for a lot of reasons, which is why, again, we need to focus on effectiveness of assessment efforts and making sure that that last part of the assessment cycle of taking action, using the results to drive change, has to happen. Now, with that, leadership, institutional leadership, should be role modeling that. They should be underscoring the importance and emphasizing the necessity of using data for improvement. And it's very easy for them to role model it, because as they talk about changes being made to the institution, changes to the department, new initiatives, they can preface those things and contextualize those things with the data sets that led them to make the decisions to make that change or make that investment. They can role model it and show how data is being used, and show how easy it is to share that information back or share it with other people. But ultimately, in all of this, we need to be mindful of motivation and engagement of one another. And I would hope, my dissertation came pre-pandemic. I would hope now more than ever, people would be more in tune and attuned and empathetic to their colleagues as people and individuals who have needs, personal, professional, and that, when somebody is hurting or experiencing trauma or is not having a need met, regardless of what aspect of their life that could be in, that can impact them, or that can creep into other aspects of their life. We cannot completely compartmentalize the impacts of needs not being met. I mean, we're just, as people, as human beings, we are not that powerful. we cannot completely control our subconscious, and we cannot completely control for the inadvertent and unexpected impact that certain physiological and psychological needs not being met can have upon us. So for me, if nothing else, this research and just learning more about self-determination theory underscores how important that is in thinking through that lens, and being mindful of the motivations or lack of motivation of people, and how that can be impacting their behavior, and thinking about that first, before making any assumptions or drawing conclusions about the person, right? And a good example is with assessment. If somebody doesn't turn their report in, to not assume it's because they don't care about assessment or that they're lazy or what it might be, but to think, well, what need for them might not have been met, or why might they not be motivated to be engaging in this process or to get their report in on time, and inquire with them about that. So those are some high level implications. I want to get a bit more specific and targeted, so folks can have some more actionable takeaways, since those are some high level components, but I wanted to make sure and reiterate those. So we can be intentional with professional development and training, by integrating a self-determination theory focus. And this shouldn't be hard. You're not going to have to become a self-determination theory expert, but really just thinking about, knowing that self-determination theory connects with faculty and staff on their own, as well as it connects with assessment. It then shouldn't be hard or resource draining to infuse those considerations, right? For us to, when we're talking about those things, to draw the connections to autonomy, competence, relatedness, and to at least just mention those things. For sharing and reporting, we can be contextualizing the work. So speaking to the relatedness component, we can be sharing what these results mean and why they're important and who was involved in them. And we can be providing and sharing transparency in order to build competence, right? So again, this aspect of role modeling, effective sharing of results is not just sharing a spreadsheet or sharing a report. It's actually communicating and being intentional to curate your message to reach the intended audience, to put it in context of what they understand, what they care about, and to show them the steps you went through, the purposes behind it, the intents, and what you're doing with it. That transparency not only shares information, which can lead to further action, but again, it can build competence, because then those people might also be working on similar projects and have not figured out the best way to effectively share or contextualize their work or engage in transparent ways with other people. So by you doing it, you can be building competence in others, which is so important because then it'll just sharpen everybody's skills over time. And we can be providing training on our processes, again, building competence, as well as pointing to support staff to help relatedness, right? So, all the time I deal with faculty and staff who say they're a department of one or they're all alone in this work. And I remind them, my full-time job is to help you. Remember that I am here to help you. Don't be afraid to call on me. But because they might forget, or they might feel like they're bothering me, it's on me to help point out and remind them that I am a resource. And it's on leaders and colleagues to remind one another to point out those supports, whether they're staff or resources. And I think it's also important to reiterate that faculty and staff who are conducting the assessment work, to reiterate and underscore that they are the leaders and the storytellers of this work, right? Like I tell faculty all the time at my institution, I'm not going to share your assessment results with other people, because that's not my story to tell. That's your program. Those are your students. You should be the ones leading this work. You should be the ones sharing your successes. You should be the ones telling the story of student learning in your program. Now, some might hear that and think it equates to work and load, but really it's an empowering thing. And I tell them, like, I will work with you if you feel like this is going to be hard, or if you're not sure how to best do that. I will work with you to best create an effective presentation or an effective flyer, or to find ways to tell that story. But I want to work with you and put you in the subject matter expert role to shape that narrative, as opposed to me just doing it. Because again, you should be a leader in the process. And so again, that can really help fill that autonomy need. Now, just like training can be important in assessment, it's important to make sure we are paying attention to the capacity of our staff, our faculty and staff, with their subject matter knowledge. right? So professional development and training should not just be isolated to assessment, even if we're talking about assessment, because that relies on them being up to date and solid in their field and in their discipline, in their work, which if they're so busy doing their job, they may not be able to keep up with what's going on in their industry and the latest trends, or they may not have the funds to participate in professional development and stay attuned to what's going on in the field. So it's important for institutions to prioritize that and make sure we're dedicating resources and time and energy and giving space for that capacity building. And we need to remind people, and that capacity building is great because good educational practice incorporates assessment. So even if folks feel like, well, we really need to develop and advance our assessment culture, so our PD should be focused on that and not on just general aspects of their field or faculty or whatever it might be, I would say that doesn't matter because any good aspect of higher education today that's promoting good practice will talk to some extent about evaluation, assessment, using data-informed actions, data-informed change, data motivating behaviors. So I don't worry about people getting PD in other space and feeling that's taking away from potential assessment, professional development, or training, because if it's done well and talking about latest trends in education, assessment's going to be part of that in some way, shape, or form. Because as I talked about with the assessment and education landscape, we are in an age where it's not just tell me, it's show me. Show me the impact you are having on students. Show me how you are shaping student success. Show me the ways in which the practices in your field or discipline or behaviors you can be doing in your role will ultimately help students, because that's the underlying goal here. So yeah, as I just alluded, they can be mutually beneficial, right? Professional development, anything can be incorporating and underscoring assessment. So I did want to get into a little bit this accountability mechanism piece, and I want to reiterate that accountability can create extrinsic motivation and elevate the importance or the relatedness of assessment. So if we were to include assessment as part of performance evaluations for faculty and staff, then that will elevate the importance of assessment, because now they know their performance, their job performance is going to be evaluated on that, right? And that will also reiterate that competence is expected, right? So if they know that part of their job evaluation is going to depend on the way in which they engage in assessment activity, then they're also going to know, well, they need to know what they're doing and they need to be competent. And therefore, these optional professional development resources or supports available on their campus that maybe they haven't been using, they'll be encouraged to use those in order to shore up that competence. But this also then creates space for employees, faculty and staff to surface issues, right? If this is part of their performance evaluation, they can then say like, hey, I don't feel like I have the power or the authority to be doing assessment in the way that's going to best serve my area or best inform on students. And so it can be empowering to have this as an accountability mechanism. Now, I definitely want to be clear here that and go back to the soapbox I was on around evaluating faculty to say, like, this is not saying that, again, assessment of student learning is used to evaluate faculty, because what we're not saying is a program or a course where students did not meet a certain learning target that's immediately going to impact their performance evaluation around assessment. No. What I'm talking about here from a performance evaluation perspective is looking at the faculty members, the quality of their engagement and participation in assessment processes. So regardless of what the results were for students, did the faculty member authentically engage? Did they complete their report? Did they take the data and take action and make changes? Are they, engaging in professional development to best do this work, right? Like that's what I'm talking about. The assessment aspect of in their performance evaluations, not to immediately just say, well, the results for the students were, below the target, so that puts you below the target, but instead to say, oh, the results were below the target. So how did you use that information to make change? And what did you do with that? That's the bit of it, like to get into on the performance evaluation part. Or, hey, you didn't turn in your report. So what's going on there? And if they can cite concerns or, valid and realistic reasons, right, why they weren't supported or they couldn't get it done, then that's the perfect place to do so. In those performance evaluation, in those conversations, they can lead to, budget decisions and providing more support and resources. So again, this aspect of accountability mechanism, again, it can be a little nuanced. So I wanted to make sure and explain that. And what's also not listed here is the idea of we can totally be integrating then positive accountability mechanisms. So we can take some of this data and know that this could be a need people have, and we could be creating assessment awards and recognition and acknowledging the hard work people are doing, the hard and good work people are doing in this space, and giving awards for most improvements in a program, or most creative sharing campaign for a program, or most advanced data analysis, whatever it might be. But providing praise, giving recognition, helping fulfill that that need that people can have to be valued and to be of community and to have voice. There are positive ways that we can be doing that with accountability mechanisms like rewards, incentives, stipends. So think about that as well. So I have information on the Jamboard that can give folks opportunity to think about and reflect on how the leadership application for self-determination theory integrated into PD and planning, reporting and sharing, building capacity, performance evaluations, and leaving room for other. Right. So obviously this can be used in many different ways, and depending on what your culture of your institution or the needs might be when you're thinking and looking through this lens, some immediate opportunities might stand out to you. Likewise, some very institution-specific examples or ideas might stand out to you. So here again are the links, the information, and I can put these in the chat again for folks. But just so people have a minute to potentially copy these down. And again, the first link is for the handout overall. The second link is specifically for the Jamboard. Know that the link to the handout is really all you need, because it then has the link to the Jamboard. But on the Jamboard, if you go to the third page or third section, this is what I was talking about, where it gives space for you to reflect and organize your notes according to each of those areas, as well as space talk about other. And again, if you wanted to, there's, then these extra pages that you could make miscellaneous notes, or have additional conversations with folks. Okay, so I just have a little bit of closing information to run through here, and then I'm all open for questions, feedback that people might have. So I want to reiterate, in addition to, so clearly in the handout, I provide some resources. First I give my dissertation, because largely this presentation is a next step or a distillation of my research. So if you want to read it more in depth and get more information, you can find that there. And then I also just want to point out the next bit of information I'm going to share is all about organizations, journals, blogs, listservs, and structured environment. They're all linked here. So you get access to all those things through this handout. But I'm going to talk about them on these slides. So first, I want to point out that if folks are wanting to know more about assessment, get more involved in assessment, engage and pull some other resources for assessment, I highly recommend all of these organizations. NILOA, the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment. Well, first I should say nearly every single one of these groups or images listed here, they have webinars, publications, resources, blogs. Some of them even have structured learning environments like courses that you can take. But all of these organizations exist, and majority of them on the screen are also free to engage with. Their resources are free. So I would definitely encourage that. What I would point out is the NASPA Evaluation and Research KC, as well as the Commission for Assessment and Evaluation and AALHE. Those three are the only organizations here that you do need to be a member in order to access all of their benefits and all of their resources. But all those groups also put out some free videos, webinars, resources as well. And then the remaining groups, NILOA, Student Affairs Assessment Leaders, CAS, the Learning Improvement Community, and APHIS, they have free resources for anyone. There's also a number of journals, blogs, white paper publication spaces that you can seek out to get literature, case studies, examples of assessment. So I'd encourage you to check those out as well. These organizations here also provide assessment-related listservs, and actually all of them are free. The NILOA, National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment, as well as AALHE, they are both geared towards all assessment, but do slant a little heavy towards academic, faculty-related assessment efforts, whereas Student Affairs Assessment Leaders is more specific to student affairs or co-curricular assessment efforts. And the Illinois Career Center has the Assessment and Research and Career Services network and listserv, and that is, as its name implies, a bit more specific and curated to assessment efforts for career services. But given the content being discussed and the practice being discussed, it probably has some carryover and relationship to the types of conversations happening for the student affairs assessment leaders. And I mentioned this before, but there are some free structured environments. The first one I'd point out is in the upper left-hand corner, that LARC grant project. So on the NILOA website, they house this robust information. It's not quite a course, although I guess potentially by definition it might be. But as you can see, it has these tabs, and then these, for each tab, there's rows underneath it, and those rows can expand. And so there's all sorts of rich information about assessment practices, assessment resources, common issues or problems that people might experience. So it's very much this self-paced, access on your own, individualized learning environment where you can get a lot of information, where the content is organized in a very structured way. Then the online open course from the Student Affairs Assessment Leaders is a course that is a MOOC, a massive open online course, and it runs once a year. We attract over 1,000 people every year. People from around the world take the course, which is really cool. I'm one of the creators and instructors for the course. We've ran it 6 times. We've served almost 10,000 people. Because again, we have over 1,000 people each year, and a couple of years we've had over 2,000 people. But it's a completely self-paced course, fully online, fully asynchronous, although we do offer some live webinar sessions and office hour sessions. But for the people who can't attend those live sessions, we record them so that you can at least see them and view the content that was shared. But we intend the course to be a resource, so that if there's even just like a little bit of information you need, you can log into the course, get that information, and be on your way. If you want to participate in the whole course, you can. Successful participation, you get a badge, a certificate of completion. But the course is 8 modules, and it's structured over 8 weeks. But because it's self-paced, some people finish the course in a couple days. Some, take the full 8 weeks. Some, are somewhere in between. So, yeah, if you're interested in that, you can, again, the link is in the handouts. You can check that out. We run the course generally like February to April each year. And that may not be the best time for folks, but the other cool thing, again, since first and foremost the course is a resource, is it's free, and you retain access to the course well after it's over. So even if February to April isn't going to work for you schedule wise, you can sign up for the course to get access and then dive back into it whenever you can. Because even folks from our very first course back in 2017, they still have access to that course shell. They can still go in there and pull resources and information. So while you wouldn't get a certificate of completion if you're not engaging during the time the course is open, you can still go in and benefit from the curated resources and information. And then lastly, in the bottom left corner there, APHIS Academy is another free resource that is a learning environment mixed with a networking opportunity, mixed with a publishing platform, because people can share blogs and resources and information and connect with one another in there. And there are some short assessment related courses that are contained within there. And again, it's free to join, and anyone can check it out. So again, I'm just putting here the link to the handout and the Jamboard. And again, the handout has then all the links for those organizations I talked about, the journals and the blogs, the listservs, and those structured environments. If you want to check any of those out. And I wanted to, and feel free to, even after this presentation's over, the Jamboard remains alive. It will be active, so folks can come in here and post their responses and engage with and share thoughts and just use it as a reflection space. Well after the courses, well after this presentation is over. So feel free to, again, treat this as your own notes page with respect to this content. But here is, I know my contact information was on the handout, but I just wanted to provide it again. And just check in and let you all know, like, that's the end of my presentation. So I'm happy to field any questions or comments that folks might have.
Mr. Joseph?
Yes.
Dr. Joseph?
Yes.
Actually, I have put one question in the chat box. Are you able to see that?
Yeah,
What are the best practical assessment methods to judge faculty?
Yep. Yeah, and I answered that kind of midway through the presentation, shortly after you had posted it.